All right, welcome everybody for this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where we are going to begin a very short series. I don't even know if it's called a series, if it's only going to be two sister classes. So let's call it the first of two sister classes. Um, Dealing with or demystifying what is this scary boogeyman called China. Right now, in Canada, I just found out that the federal there's actually the CSIS, Canada's intelligence agency, has now sponsored a public inquiry into foreign interference of the federal election process with a focus on China as the big baddies that influenced Canada's election process, with a little tip of the hat to Russia. There's been patriots from Canada's intelligence agencies, you know, sounding the alarm that a foreign Chinese Communist Party agency has infiltrated and taken over our world. And so that we should be very, very scared of this thing. And in the United States, we have the FBI director, Christopher Wray, saying similar things, warning of China's malevolent intent to launch all sorts of attacks, maybe cyber, maybe other, onto the United States to undermine freedom, the freedom and democracy that we have enjoyed for 40, 50 years, 60 years, or longer. Um, and so there's a lot of hysterics, and a lot of this is bringing a lot of the people who should know better, um, amongst those who have woken up to the agency, the intention, the agenda to end nation states, create a world government for all sorts of very, very, very disgusting reasons. A lot of people who should know better are getting swept up into these sorts of narratives as well, which bring them into, as I just saw, Brett Weinstein was on Tucker Carlson doing this crazy interview, never proving a single thing, but going after speculative conjecture, painting the idea that China is really the big villain of America, behind the immigration crisis, directing immigrants from South America to destroy America from within through the porous Texas border, working with Biden, even alluding to the fact that military age men, Chinese military age men in South America, is how he words it. Not Chinese construction workers working on the BRI or construction projects or anything like that. It's military age men, um, could also be infiltrated through to help Biden as part of this um, secret, I don't even know what to call it, mercenary force. All this weird stuff. Even Chinese vampires on Fox News. They're talking about these Chinese vampires who drink blood, who are part of their training process, who are working with Biden, who's a CPC puppet just like Justin. So obviously people are being worked into a frenzy, and there's a conjunction of the Five Eyes, the CIA, FBI operatives, high-level officials within Canada's intelligence, all finding communion with George Soros's view as well, that the Chinese CPC is the ultimate boogeyman of the world, and it's sad. So, as I pointed out, and Cynthia and I pointed out in our introduction, what better way to address this is to deal with the underlying ignorance that people have over what other cultures are. This is part of how we have been profiled, how a lot of these gossipy things are turned from gossip into some sort of a sacred myth, just like what was done to us, overseen by the John Birch Society during the Cold War days. Similar types of spells, hypnotic trances are induced using, this type of lateral conjectural thinking, but that works on people's psychology. There are things that we have as unexamined assumptions, unexamined prejudices, due to certain ignorance of our own history, of what has actually taken over our own society, as well as other cultures, that allows for these things for us to fall victim to these things. If we were knowledgeable, it's our contention that we would be invulnerable. This sort of, I guess, for lack of a better word, let's call it spell making. So the first person who I'm very happy, I've known now Li Kengjing for a number, almost 9 months, no, almost a year, and he's continuously impressed me regarding his investigative skills, his ability to appreciate the intersections between the deeper currents of history, economics, politics, philosophy. Next week, we're going to have Dr. Quan Le go through something as an interesting follow-up regarding the battle over education throughout thousands of years. Today, we're going to get a bit of an exposition on the topic of Guangzhi, inter an introduction to 3,000 years of Chinese economic thought. Without further ado, let me introduce Li Kengzheng. Li, it's all yours. Li, tell me. Oh, there you are.
I'm here. Don't worry. Okay, everybody. So first of all, I'm very excited to be here. Um, for this lecture, I thought about it a lot, and one thing I kind of came to was a lot of the interpretation and understanding I'm lucky enough to have. A lot of it comes from some of the background that I have in understanding human psychology, some stuff to do with biology, actually. And I realized upon reflection, a lot of that stuff that I had the pleasure of embarking on and understanding earlier in my life has really colored the way I'm able to take a lot from the Chinese texts and stuff I read now. So as we get into this lecture, one of the first things I wanted to do was actually kind of take a step back, share a little bit of that important context that I realized has been so important for me. And I'm going to start it out in a way which might seem a little unorthodox, but I'm actually going to start it out with a song. So I'm going to play a classical Chinese song for you guys. And while it's playing, firstly, just enjoy the music. But should you find yourself becoming a little bored, there's some core themes that I want you to think about. And these are actually the social dynamics. So, with what you see going on, there'll be beautiful music. But are the musicians operating independently or separately? Is there a leader in the room? And if so, what really is his function? And how would you define that leadership? Is it dominance based? So is the leader exerting a tyrannical authority on the musicians? Or is it more so grounded in a willingness of the participants to grant their attention freely, maybe because they feel they might benefit from having this leader? And if all else fails, see what their eyes tell you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Amazing. So, and if it had have kept playing, you would have seen that he was calling out individual people, having them stand up. Then he brings up everybody, and they all stand up. They bow. He bows to the audience. He walks away, and everyone continues clapping for the people there. So I hope, um, besides the great music, when you guys were listening to that, you were having some of those thoughts in your head. The is this a leadership role that they're giving the conductor freely? Um, are individual members of the orchestra being oppressed by his control over them? Like certainly they don't all have 100% freedom to play as loud as they want or on a slightly different rhythm than what they want. Um, they all are almost entering into an implicit agreement where they all feel that without the conductor, each one of them would perform suboptimally, and then together they're able to exceed what they would be able to do if they were all just coming out alone. Well, this actually has a lot of uh, it's very analogous to the economy as well. So you have different areas of society, and you would see some people in that beautiful piece of music had more attention than others. So there were some people where they would basically have solos, right? You can almost think of that as a very successful person in any one field, right? A titan of business or a titan of science. And there he is. He's getting his time in the spotlight. He's getting considerably more attention than everyone else. Yet it can never be too much, such that whole groups of people, other like the entire group playing the strings, they still have a role to play too, to come together and balance out the single guy playing the flute or the horn. So when you look at it this way, it starts to kind of, um, on a very subconscious level, it starts to build a deeper understanding of why human cooperation is important. And this is something that's been recognized in Chinese history for a very long time. So, with the next thing that I want to go into reading, this is basically before we get into the actual readings from the economic text. I just want to kind of follow up on what we were just hearing. So, I'm going to share my screen now. So, the Guanzi is written from the perspective of the people living in the Qi state before the Qin state, which you can see on the far left, slowly unified China for the first time, which then became the Han Dynasty. It's written in the form of dialogues, for the most part, between a duke in the Qi state uh, and Guanzong, who would be considered like a sage who was answering his economic questions. Now, when you look into like, is that actually, was it just a single person who wrote it, and did he actually write it all like in the year 700, which I think was when Guanzong was alive? The answer would be no. It was written over several hundred years, and the style of writing it from that perspective, so as if it was a dialogue, it was to encapsulate like the idea of how those conversations might have gone from the perspective that the Qi state was incredibly successful. And this is like, if anyone kind of knows about like modern business marketing, this is really cool because kind of like it was like a giant split test, like A/B testing. So it's like where you'd be like, oh, do I want to make the product blue or green? I'll show it to 100 people in each color and see which one gets more clicks, right? You're getting a lot of data on what seems to work better. And during this period, you had, and they called it a golden period because although it's not a period of unification, a lot of different schools of thought were all being tested out in these different states, and they were responding in real time. So if you were developing a better strategy, and you were actually attracting people to want to move to your state was becoming more rich. Well, that money was the basis of how you would formulate an army which could protect your state, but also you could have better infrastructure. So during this giant split test that was taking place, the Qi state was the last one to be unified in. So clearly they earned a certain amount of respect, and they were known for being very good in their leadership. And you can actually see the unification, right here. So if you look here, Qi was the very last one that was unified in what would become the Han Dynasty. (221), it was amalgamated in. And yeah, this is the 100 schools theory was also a period was going on. So again, it was just a flourishing of different opinions, different knowledge, everything being tested out to figure out what worked best. Okay, and with that, let's get into some of the actual content. So with this paper, this was written, or this book, it's a history of Chinese economic thought. And I'm going to start with the chapter on the Guanzi because the author adds some commentary in there, which is quite still helpful as we're kind of going to get our training wheels off as we go. Okay. The book Guanzi was traditionally treated as a work written by Guanzhong, whose economic thought we discussed a bit in chapter 2, section 1. However, because some lines in the book mention matters that took place at Guanzhong's deathbed or after his death, some scholars from the 3rd century AD on began to doubt that the book was actually written by Guanzhong himself. It is generally accepted now that Guanzi was written by several anonymous writers of different periods who were ardent supporters of Guanzhong's economic policies. The compiling of the book was probably completed around the middle of the Warring States period, or about the 4th century BC. For this reason, we shall consider the economic thought embodied in this book as one of the contributions of the Warring States period and deal with it separately from the economic thought of Guanzhong himself. Among the existing 76 articles in the Guanzi, more than 2/3 concern economic problems. This is rather extraordinary among works contributed by the various schools of thought of the pre-Qin period. Generally, the discussions in Guanzi of economic problems are penetrating and meticulous, even preeminent in certain aspects, especially on problems of commerce, money, and price, and compare with the ideas of ancient Athenian philosophers and brilliance. For the sake of convenience, throughout this chapter, we shall use the writer or the writers of Guanzi to refer to the various anonymous writers of the book. Among the thinkers of the pre-Qin period, the writer Guanzi and Xuan Kong, to whom we shall turn in the next chapter, were comparatively thoroughgoing materialists. This materialist viewpoint permeated many aspects of Guanzi's political and ethical concepts, the conditions of material life forming the foundation of politics and ethics. In regard to ethics, Guanzi held that the practicability of certain moral criteria was dependent upon the conditions of people's material life. Man will observe rituals when his barns and storehouses are well packed, and he will care about honor and disgrace when he has enough clothing and food. That is to say, ethics can come into play only under certain economic conditions. And then I made a note here. So we see this in the stuff that I was entering with when I was talking about when people are in a more scarce upbringing and they're more prone to a more dominance orientation, they're more worried about their self. And they're in a state of scarcity, so they're more likely to not worry about, they can't afford to worry about making donations or these higher thoughts of honor as easily whenever they're basically just struggling for survival and they might die in a ditch in 3 weeks. It follows that ethical concepts such as virtue, righteousness, rights, and the like should be given concrete economic content. For instance, the concept of virtue was supposed to express itself through some 32 economic activities which in turn may be classified into six categories: enriching the livelihood of people, facilitating the circulation of goods, improving hydraulic sources for the benefits of the people, so in other words, water sources, lightening the burden of the people, assisting the people in the case of an emergency, and helping the poor. Supplying ethical concepts with concrete economic details in this way was, of course, rather uncommon in philosophical works of ancient China. The point that production of wealth comes from the foundation of social life was also given a very clear expression in the Guanzi. The first line of the book runs, "Those who have land to look after and people to tend, like a shepherd, should keep their eyes on the four seasons and watch over the granaries and storehouses. If the state is wealthy, people from afar will come, and if the land is reclaimed, people will settle down. To rule a state, it is necessary to start with economic affairs." This line of thinking was not peculiar to the Guanzi, for many thinkers of the time had also pointed out that land and people were the two fundamental factors of social production. But in Guanzi, this idea was given a special emphasis from beginning to end, as evidenced by the last article in the work, in which passages to this effect were repeated once more. For example, the first thing to rule a state is to enrich the people. It is easy to rule the rich people, but difficult to rule the poor ones. How do we know this? When people are rich, they feel contented with their native places and are enamored of their homes. In turn, this leads them to revere their superiors and fear penalties, making them easy to rule. When people are poor, they are a threat to their native places and take their homes lightly. This in turn makes them dare to offend their superiors and break laws, making them difficult to rule. For this reason, a well-governed state is always a wealthy one, and a disorderly state always a poor one. Therefore, a ruler who is good at ruling, the state must first of all enrich his people, then govern them. One who is good at ruling, the government must get the farmland in the countryside reclaimed and make the city prosper, and get the granaries filled up and the prisons empty. No, here's the prison should be empty because no one should be committing crimes. Because if everybody has good opportunities to advance themselves, they probably won't be resorting to crime. Opulence for those who are high, and sufficiency for those who are low. This is the task of a great sage king. The policy of enriching the people put forward in Guanzi presumes that the economic life of the people affects the conditions of the state. That is, whether it will be peaceful or chaotic, and whether the government is good or bad. Passages to this effect are indeed too numerous to be counted in this book. This shows how firm the attitude of its writer was on this problem. But it must be pointed out that in the whole feudal period of China, progressive thinkers who upheld or endorsed this important political tenet were by no means few, and their concept of the term people varied a great deal depending on the historical period in which they lived. In the Warring States period in China, the idea of people also included the newly emerging landlord class, which was then still an oppressed class. In military affairs, Guanzi recognized that what counted in war was, in the matter of the war chest, that your amount is unrivaled. In that of military engineering, that your skill is unmatched. And in that of weapons, that your instruments are invincible. In other words, the economic strength of a state is the determinant for victory or defeat in war. So keep in mind, in the context of the Warring States period, where this wisdom is developing, especially in the state of Qi, and they're recognizing, oh, the military doesn't come first. The military can come as a result of a strong economy, and a strong economy comes from people, and those people having opportunities to make money, which we'll get to in a moment. So In other words, the economic strength of a state is the determinant for victory or defeat in a war. I guess I could have just read that. The writer even went so far as to suggest use of the holy tortoise, which was looked on in those days as a divine creature and therefore the treasure of the state, as a mortgage for borrowing foodstuffs for the army from rich people. This means that the school of Guanzi not only rejected the dispensation of divine power, but also went a step further to take advantage of existing superstitions to achieve a certain political and economic purpose. This is what is said. The wise man enslaves the ghosts and gods, but the fool believes in them. This perhaps suffices to show the strong inclination on the part of the writer of the Guanzi toward materialism. And what they mean here, right, is in China, there's a lot of superstitions. People will hold certain objects, they'll walk with certain objects, they'll overpay for those certain objects, which it's not always a good thing either. Like if you're spending significant amounts of money and you're kind of being cheated out of it, that's also not good. But what they're saying here is that the leader shouldn't fall victim to these tricks, to being enticed by, like, oh, this amulet or this special turtle, right? Instead, the king should recognize that no, like, people need food, they need shelter, they need clothing. If I can rent this turtle to somebody and I can provide people for their real needs, that is preferable. I should not just take the turtle for myself, keep the turtle, and then benefit from that. Whatever I think it's giving me, this special idolist turtle. So with that was our introduction there. And then now we're going to open up the actual Quinjiang economic policies and actually read what the translation of the original text has to say. So we're going to Quinjiang chapter A.
What's this book called that we're gonna open?
So this is the Guanzi translated by Ricken. So this is the original Guanzi as it's been translated.
Okay.
446. And if I ask you to read, it will be from this. So as I said, it's written in a dialectical form. So it's kind of written as a conversation. So does the implementation of Xinjiang economic policies involve a set method? Asked Duke Quan. No, there are no set methods, replied Guanzi. When things develop, one acts accordingly. When one hears news, one takes advantage of it. Accordingly, if one rules a country without being able to procure the wealth of the rest of the world and attracts its peoples, that country cannot be successful. What do you mean by procure the wealth of the rest of the world? Asked the Duke. Anciently, in the time of the Jie, his female musicians numbered 30,000, and the sound of their singing and dancing coming from the south gate and their music still being played at dawn could be heard as far as the three thoroughfares. There was no one among them who did not wear embroidered clothing. Yi Yin, who had the unemployed woman of Bo produce pieces of embroidery and pack them in bundles. For each bundle, Yi Yin received 100 zhang of unhusked grain from the county of Ji. Now, Jie County was that of the Son of Heaven, but Jie had no concern for the empire. He merely decorated his women and listened to the music of the bell and drum. Thus, Yi Yin obtained his grain and seized control of the trade. This is what is meant by procuring the wealth of the rest of the world. What do you mean by attract the peoples of the rest of the world? Asked the Duke. I suggest that in each sub-district, each sub-district has a granary, and each village has 5 grain storage pits. You should provide long-term loans to those who do not have enough to pay their taxes, and extend burial expenses to those who are unable to bury their dead. When the starving can obtain food, the freezing can obtain clothing, the dead can obtain proper burial, and the needy can obtain relief. The world's coming to us will be like a flowing stream. This is what is meant by attracting the peoples of the rest of the world. Thus, the sage is good at making use of resources that do not belong to him and employing men who are other than his own. With moving words and persuasive speeches, he is able to draw the multitudes to him. Good, said the Duke. So again, we can see this is almost a perfect parallel to what I was reading earlier about how pro-social leadership strategies are focused on attracting people towards yourself. People want to come to you because of the environment that you are fostering and creating, as opposed to saying, oh, go out, grab people, bring them here by force. That is a very dominance-oriented mindset, because you wouldn't believe they would want to come any other way other than by force. But when you're having to do that, you've already lost. Du Quan questioned Guanzi, saying, now Tang, with only, and this isn't the later Tang dynasty, this would be a different Tang, either a Tang person or a prelude. Now Tang, with only the 70 square li of Bo, was able to annex the empire of Jia. What was the reason? Jia did not allow the construction of footbridges in the winter or the binding together of rafts. In the summer, so he could watch his people freeze and drown when attempting to ford the streams and rivers. He turned loose female tigers in marketplaces so he could watch his people's alarm and terror. Tang, however, was different. He had his people gather vegetables and collect grain. He fed the starving, clothed those suffering from cold, and provided relief to the needy. The world came to Tang like a flowing stream. This is how Jia lost the empire. So Jia was being antisocial towards his subjects, and you saw all those little states. So they just left. They just went to a different state. And then suddenly no one wanted to live there anymore. And his selfish pleasure of watching people suffer, it ultimately blew back in his face. Jia made it possible for Tang to do this, said Du Khan. What was his reason? Nu Hua was a good person, or was a person Jia loved, so Tang bribed her with 1,000 caddies of gold. Chun Ni was a person Jia liked, so Tang bribed him with 1,000 caddies of gold. In his inner chambers, then, there was a yin of Nu Hua. In his outer court, there was the yang of Chun Ni. The combination of persuasive arguments from both the yin and the yang enabled Tang to become the son of heaven. Such was Tang's secret plan. So in other words, this guy was being cruel, so he bought off A, his favorite concubine, and B, his favorite minister. And by taking these two emissaries of this guy away from him, no bloodshed, no fighting, but the people below him were happy to turn on him because he wasn't a good leader, and people didn't obviously then stand up for him when he's being turned on. Du Quan said, I have heard about the methods for implementing Qingzhong economic policies and the different ways of maintaining stability in state finances. May I know how one should use one's armed forces? Only after winning 5 battles should one resort to armed force, replied Guanzi. What do you mean by this? The battles, replied Guanzi, to maintain a proper balance, to maintain stability, to control the flow of goods and grain, to cope with change, and to deal properly with different types of terrain. This is what I meant by only after winning 5 battles should one resort to armed force. Good, said Du Khan. So here it's don't resort to using armed force if you haven't built up your economy and done all that much more important stuff. That your army should come last and only as a last resort. Um, Duke Huan wished to reward the relatives of men killed in battle, saying, "Our country is one that occupies a crossroads position, has a capital that must import food from the outside, and is located in a place where tigers and wolves would like to settle. Now, every battle, there are the dead who must be carted away and the wounded who must be assisted from the field. But I have nothing to give the orphans, the grandsons of the white haired old men, and the army widows. What is to be done about it? If you hold back goods desired by our country's eminent families, and people who have been elevated to high office live off their estates or engage in hoarding, the price of these things will go up. If you release them, the price will go down. If you control these goods, the price will go up. If you relax your control, the price will go down. Since people who have been elevated to high office, those who live off their estates, rich merchants, large scale traders, and households that accumulate more than they need, store away surpluses, and amass supplies, all constitute the country's power elite. I suggest you dress in plain white mourning robes to visit local offices. You should hold audiences there with meritorious ministers, old and honorable families, persons who have been elevated to high office, those who live off their estates and households that accumulate more than they need, store away surpluses, and amass supplies, saying to them, if our walls are weak, it will invite an attack. If we lack reserves, it will invite a siege. The world is in turmoil, but she alone does not share in its plots. You, distinguished gentlemen, possess grain, including pulse and unhusked grain, but do not dare market it. I'm asking to take it off your hands at the regular market price. You should then settle a contract with them and permit no concealment or movement of the amount of grain in their possession. People in great distress for lack of grain, on hearing about this, will rush to buy grain from the government in unlimited amounts. They will come from near and far, and with no urging, so that without your doing anything, the price of grain will increase 40-fold. You may then use this grain, the price of which has now risen 40-fold, to provide relief for orphans and widows, care for those stricken with poverty and disease, and look after those who are alone and exhausted and childless, so that they will not have to sell themselves to others in order to find nourishment or end up dying in moats and ditches. Such being the case, the knights will struggle to be at the fore and act as the vanguard in battle. They will never malign but perform their duty even though the dead who must be carted away and the wounded who must be assisted from the field may count for more than half the army. Why is this the case? It is not because the knights like war and treat death lightly. It is the application of Qingjong economic policies that makes it so. So, in other words, and this is like a good illustrative example, you're not you're using the market forces that exist, but you're not either pledging to stay out of it, and you're not leaving it for others to hoard the grain, speculate on prices. So when the price goes high, that they could sell it down. You're not stealing the grain from the rich families either. You're asking them to buy it from them at a fair price, but you're using your knowledge and your wisdom about how these economic forces will then react and what movements will take place so that you can provide for the orphans. You've borrowed the grain from the rich families. You still intend to give that back, but the price has gone up because more people are coming because they've heard that there's a new increased supply on the market. And you see this even reflected today. For example, China has no property taxes. So I think in Toronto, if you have $1 million house, you're paying at least $10,000 a year. $2 million house, which a lot of houses are now 2 million in Toronto, that's $20,000 a year. So if you're retired and you're expected to basically pay per year for the privilege of owning your house, uh, the almost a minimum wage salary, that's obviously not very pleasant, and you're not going to feel very good about that. But with these kind of methods, so what they do in China is when these cities start developing, the price of land in a lot of these cities goes up. So the city will lease land to businesses that want to come in. So say Huawei is like, we need a new factory, we want to build a factory. The city will lease Huawei that land. Huawei will build the factory and pay whatever, whether it's rent payments per month. That goes to the city treasury. That's why they have no need to charge property tax on the typical people living in houses. They're basically saying, well, we have the land. You want to rent the land. We'll rent you the land. The land has gone up in price because of the development of our city. So we can make a lot of money off of renting Huawei this land. It's like nobody really loses. Huawei would pay rent for a factory either way. Why not have the city rent some vacant land to Huawei? So these are the mindsets which make what you see in China today really possible in a lot of respects. Another example is in China, 80% of people pay no income tax either, and we'll get to why that is. So this is the last one I'm gonna read from this chapter. And again, actually I'll read 5 and 6. So Du Quan said, our demand for hides, rib bones, sinews, and horns has been very intense. And then the reason why that matters is because these are all the materials that were used to make weapons, resulting in a heavy tax burden being placed on the people and increased prices for these things in the market. This is no way to rule a country. I suggest, replied Guanzi, that you issue orders for raising the height of bridges and lowering the bed of waterways to such an extent that people crossing from east to west or from north to south will no longer be able to see each other. Agreed, said the Duke. When this has been carried out for the period of a year, the demand for hides, rib bones, sinews, and horns had been decreased by half, as well as the tax burden placed on the people. Du Quan then summoned Guanzi and asked him, what is the reason for this? Guanzi replied, when bridges and waterways were level with the surrounding surface, a husband and wife pushing a light hand cart could easily travel 100 li. Nowadays, bridges are so high and waterways are so deep that people crossing from any direction cannot see their counterpart on the other side. If heaven sends down even a light drizzle, the bridges become so slippery that the strength of 10 men is not enough to push a cart over them. And where the ditch is broad, if it rains, the strength of 10 men cannot guarantee being able to cross. Indeed, the only way is to rely on the strength of oxen and horses. But the areas where oxen and horses have become totally exhausted and one after another died in their places and stretch as far as the eye can see, their hides, rib bones, sinews, and horns have now become so plentiful that even if you were to give them away, no one would take them. Without you doing anything, the price of oxen and horses is bound to increase 100-fold. The rest of the world, on hearing of this, is certain to part with its oxen and horses and send them to Qi like a flowing stream. Thus, raising the height of bridges and lowering the bed of waterways is a means to obtain oxen and horses from the rest of the world as well as relieve the tax burden on our people. The Da Rumi says, producing things is not as good as collecting them. And you would keep in mind here that when they're talking about the people walking along, right? A lot of those people, there wouldn't be the typical farmer, right? Those would be people who are trading something from one area to another. They're buying from one person in one area where something is slightly cheaper, and they're trying to make a profit by bringing it somewhere else. But there's a lot of things where they would rather have people within the state of Qi produce those things, farmers. So when they're raising the bridges and lowering the creek beds in this example, it's not actually putting really a burden on the people who are settled there. It's the people who are kind of crossing in, trying to make a profit on unloading some goods, more of those people, and it wouldn't really be negatively affecting the farmers themselves. So this will be the last one I read from this chapter. So it says, Du Quan said, most of our bows and crossbows are warped and defective. Why should we heavily tax our people to support bow makers when they make most of their bows and crossbows warped and defective? Um, Resting places for geese and ducks are nearby, replied Guanza. But jungle fowl, gamecocks, swans, and buzzards fly far away. I suggest that you use Jade B to invite people where there are swans and jungle fowl to come to court. Agreed, said the Duke. When this had been carried out for a period of a year, there was no shortage of bows and crossbows, and the men who had been rushing about in desperation were no longer present. None of the bows or crossbows were warped or defective when, after 3 months, their cases were opened. The Duke then summoned Guanza and asked him, what is the reason for this? Guanza replied, you used Jade B to invite people living where there are swans and jungle fowl to come to court. When the people of the marshes heard about it, they determined to exceed their ordinary performance and shoot longer distances. However, without a 10-jun crossbow, they were unable to hit the jungle fowl, gamecocks, swans, and buzzards. If such a 10-jun crossbow has not been pressed into shape in a bow frame, it will be incapable of righting itself. Now, what was the reason that none of their bows or crossbows were warped or defective when, after 3 months, their cases were opened? It is because the artisans have become accustomed to pressing their bows and crossbows into shape in a bow frame. So essentially, by inviting these people and these people bringing gifts of these birds, these swans, because that's the specialty of their region, it increases the demand for bows so much that now all the bows floating around on the market are suddenly much better. So again, it's ideas where you're thinking creatively and you're thinking, how can I harness these market forces rather than the exact opposite, which we would often hear about in most university economics textbooks, where whatever the equilibrium price is, you just have to worship that and don't ask why, just calculate it. And that's really what they do. I took a lot of I basically had a minor in economics, and in all of those classes, really, a lot of what you're doing is just you're confirming that the price is what it is, and then they'll be like, "Oh, let's say the supply increases," and then you'd be like, "The supply increases, yes. So then the new price should be lower. So no one is any better off. Like it always balances out, but obviously this isn't true, right? Like if you have like less of an important resource, yes, okay, the price may be higher, so the person making it may technically get the same amount of coins, but that doesn't actually mean that the person who now can't afford that, like that's not going to be good for them, right? So they make it seem like it works out if you are the person selling bows, I suppose, but they don't look at the bigger picture of how all of these things are interrelated. Um, Matt, how are we for time?
Well, we are pushing the 2 hour mark. It probably is a good idea to think about the concluding remarks soon.
Okay, okay,
Plus, we
okay,
want to be able to have maybe at least 20 minutes of Q&A. So yeah, keep that in mind.
okay. Would you possibly be able to read a little bit for me?
Yeah, sure. Starting where?
Um, yes. It's on entering the capital. on entering the capital.
Oh,
It's a chapter. 227.
okay. You want to find that page? I'll read.
Oh, you want to read from my screen? Sure.
Oh, or you want me to do a screen share on my side and open it
If
up?
you could, yeah.
Yeah. One sec. Okay, that's page 227, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 second. 227 of 558, right?
Yep.
Or 588.
Yeah, and you can start. Or it's 227 on the book. It's I'm not sure what the 235 is the page in the PDF,
Okay.
and then you would start with the translation where it says translation.
Okay. Going slow here. You see my the PDF?
Yep, 235.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. On entering the capital.
And
Translation.
the translation. Yeah,
Yeah. All right. How many just go on and you'll just stop me, right?
I'll stop you.
All right. After entering his capital, the new ruler issues instructions concerning the 9 compassions on the 45th day following the winter solstice. These 9 are number 1, honoring the elderly, 2, caring for the young, 3, pitying the orphaned, 4, providing for the disabled, 5, bringing together those who are alone, 6, inquiring after the sick, 7, keeping track of the destitute, 8, providing relief for those in distress, 9, continuing the sacrifices for lines that have been broken. Honoring the elderly means that in the capital and all administrative centers, there shall be officials charged with looking after the elderly. Persons over 70 shall have 1 son exempted from labor services, and every 3 months they shall receive a present of meat. Those who are over 80 shall have 2 sons exempted from labor services, and each month they shall receive a present of meat. Those who are over 90 shall have their entire family exempted from labor service, and each day they shall receive wine and meat. It's a good incentive to live long. When they die, the sovereign shall supply them with inner and outer coffins. Their sons and younger brothers shall be urged to provide them with the finest delicacies to eat, to ask what they want, and to seek for what they desire. This is what is meant by honoring the elderly. Caring for the young means that in the capital and all administrative centers there shall be officials charged with looking after young children. When soldiers and people in general have children, these children may include infants whose care becomes an insurmountable burden. For families with 3 young children, the wife shall be exempted from exactions of hemp or silk cloth. I guess that's like taxes of some sort. Um, Where there are 4, the entire family shall be exempted from labor service. Where there are 5, the children shall also be provided with a nursemaid, and the family shall receive food sufficient for 2. This shall continue until the children are able to take care of themselves. This is what is meant by caring for the young. Pitying the orphaned means that in the capital and all administrative centers there shall be officials charged with looking after orphans. When soldiers and people in general die, their children become orphans, and the very young, having been deprived of the care of their parents, cannot live on their own and must be taken in by members of the district, family acquaintances, or old friends. Families that take care of one orphan shall have 1 son exempted from labor service. Those that take care of 2 orphans shall have 2 sons exempted from labor service. For those that take care of 3 orphans, the entire family shall be exempted from labor service. The officials charged with looking after orphans shall make frequent inquiries about them and make certain they are informed about the situation concerning their food and drink, whether or not they are cold and hungry, and whether or not their bodies are emaciated, in order to show their concern for them. This is what is meant by pitying the orphaned. Yeah, the Biden regime could do itself a service by studying this. Um, Providing for the disabled means that the capital and all administrative centers shall be. Oh, sorry. Providing for the disabled means that in the capital and all administrative centers there shall be officials charged with looking after the disabled. The sovereign shall gather together and provide for those who are deaf, blind, dumb, lame, and partially paralyzed, or have deformed hands and are unable to live on their own. The disabled shall be placed in hostels so that they may be clothed and fed for as long as they live. This is what is meant by providing for the disabled. Bringing together those who are alone means that in the capital and all administrative centers there shall be officials charged with acting as matchmakers. Husbands who have lost their wives are called widowers, Guan, meaning, women who have lost their husbands are called widows. These officials shall bring widowers and widows together and allot them fields and houses to provide them with homes. Only after 3 years shall they be required to perform government service. This is what is meant by bringing together those who are alone. Inquiring after the sick means that in the capital and all administrative centers there are officials charged with looking after the sick. When soldiers and people in general become ill, officials charged with looking after the sick shall, in accordance with orders from the sovereign, inquire after them. In the case of those who are over 90, this inquiry shall take place once every day. For those who are over 80, it shall take place once every 2 days. And for those who are over 70, it shall take place every 3 days. For ordinary people, it shall take place once every 5 days. If the illness is very severe, it shall be reported to the sovereign, who shall personally conduct his own inquiries. Officials charged with looking after the sick shall have their duty traveling throughout the country in order to inquire after the sick. This is what is meant by inquiring after the sick. Keeping track of the destitute means that in the capital and all administrative centers there shall be officials charged with looking after the destitute. Should there be destitute men and women who have no place to stay, or guests from abroad who have been cut off from their provisions, members of the district who report such matters shall be rewarded. Those who do not shall be punished. This is what is meant by keeping track of the destitute. Providing relief for those in distress means that when the harvest is poor and ordinary people are attacked by fatal diseases so that many die, the sovereign shall relax his punishments, pardon the guilty, and distribute stored grain in order to feed them. This is what is meant by providing relief for those in distress. Continuing the sacrifices for lines that have been broken means that when soldiers and people in general die in their service of the sovereign or in battle, the sovereign shall cause their acquaintances and old friends to receive funds from the sovereign to conduct sacrifices for them. This is what is meant by continuing the sacrifices for lines that have been broken.
Perfect. Thank you. That's good. And now I'm just going to share, and then I have one last piece I want to read, and then I would say we can open it up to some questions, discussion, and then there's a clip in there that after we've done the questions, if we can end on a video clip at the end.
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna. I don't think I'm sharing. Am I sharing now?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Du Khan questioned Guanzi, saying, I wish to place a special tax on towers and pavilions. What about it? This will harm construction, replied Guanzi. I wish to place a special tax on trees. This will lead to chopping down those that are alive, Guanzi replied. I wish to place a special tax on the 6 domestic animals. This will lead to killing the living. I wish to place a special tax on men. What about that? That will lead to their concealing their true numbers. Such being the case, Duke Huan continued, how am I to run the country? Guanzi replied, only by managing the mountains and seas. What do you mean by managing the mountains and seas? The state of a king who takes advantage of the sea pays very careful attention, plans for collecting revenue on salt. What do you mean by plans for collecting revenue on salt? Asked Duke Huan. In a household of 10 persons, responded Guanzi, 10 people will eat salt. In a household of 100 persons, 100 will eat salt. Each month, an adult male will consume 5 and a third sheng of salt. An adult female will consume 3 and a third sheng, and a child 2 a third sheng. These are general figures. 100 sheng of salt equals 1 fu. If you were to order the price of salt be increased, half a copper cash, for each fu, this would be 50 cash. If you were to increase it by 1 cash for each fu, it would be 100 cash. If you were to increase it by 2 cash for each fu, it would be 200 cash. For each zheng, it would be 2,000 cash. For 10 zheng, it would be 20,000 cash. For 100 zheng, 200,000. And for 1,000 zheng, it would be 2 million. These are units of measurement. In a country of 10,000 chariots, the total population will number 10 million. By combining these figures, one arrives at an estimated income of 2 million cash per day. In 10 days, it will amount to 20 million cash, and in 1 month, to 60 million. In a country of 10,000 chariots, men who could be subjected to special tax levies will number 1 million. If each month each of these men pays a special tax of 30 cash, it will only amount to 30 million cash. Now, without placing a special tax on either adults or children, we may have 60 million cash, the tax income of 2 such countries. If you, my lord, were to issue an order saying, I am going to impose a special tax on adults and children, it would give rise to great yelling and screaming. But now, supposing you issue orders to adopting the SALT plan, then even if the amount reverting to your government were 100 times this, men would have no way to avoid it. Such would be the inevitable results. So the reason why this refers to the sea is because they would make salt from seawater. They would lay it out and allow it to evaporate, and then collect the salt. And that was an important revenue generator for the government throughout a long period of Chinese history. And because of the manner in which salt was produced like that, it more or less would concentrate into some forms of monopolies. There would be like larger operations doing all the boiling of it, and because of that, the government figured, well, if it's going to be a monopoly either way, if we run that monopoly, right, just by slightly adjusting the price on a commodity that everybody needs anyways, we can save placing those targeted burdens on either animals, which will then affect people who need animals, or on men. And then it's like, okay, well, if you're a man, that kind of sucks, right? But if you find these general ways, it's like, we're going to produce the salt for you. We'll just tweak the price. It's kind of like when we think of monopolies today. Anyone who's from Canada would know that our cell phones, for example, that's it's not a monopoly where there's just one company. There's about 2, and we pay some of the highest rates in the world. It's like, just imagine if there was one cell phone company, but it was provided by the government, and maybe they took a small profit off of that, but in return for that, you had no income tax. It's like these are the kind of ideas that were written about 2,500 years ago, but still play a very strong role in China today. So in I wouldn't say everyone, but in a significant number of Xi Jinping's speeches, He's constantly bringing up quotes that are either directly lifted from the Guanzi or very, very similar to ones in the Guanzi. Oh yeah, so this one's a funny one. This is a translation by Google Translate, so it's not like a very good translate. But if I was to read it in Chinese, most of us wouldn't understand it. So those who do things are born of worries, succeed in tasks, and lose pride, which is a famous saying by him. But it's coming from the Guanzi, and it means most things in the world occur due to careful planning, success due to pragmatic efforts, and failure comes from pride and indulgences. In an important speech at the conference celebrating the 40th anniversary of Reform and Opening Up, Comrade Xi Jinping quoted this ancient saying to emphasize that great dreams cannot be waited for or shouted out, but can be fought out and worked out. So this is a smaller piece that's taken from the Guanzi, and I think it's one of the parts where it's talking about how when people aren't very well off, they aren't rich, they're born of worries. They might take on like if they do tasks, like if they work and they try to develop, then they succeed. Whereas if they just try to take more prideful routes, or I liked this one because it's kind of similar to the whole avoiding, like when you're born in scarcity, you should avoid still the dominance sort of mindset of operating based on just self-interested pride. Um, and there's many in here too, where he was quoting the Guanzi. One of the best ones was government thrives when it obeys the people's will, and government fails when it goes against the people's will. And that's almost a direct one from what we were just reading. Um, there's actually just one more that so this is a short chapter in the Guanzi, and in it, Guanzhang is rebutting the theories of two other people. One is the personification of Mr. Great Extravagance, and the other is Mr. Idle Fields. Mr. Idle Fields here is representing somebody who is advocating that you just get like rich feudalists or little mini landlords to just accumulate large amounts of fields, because it's better to have some capitalist owning like a large portion of field and just paying people wages to farm it, rather than having it be idle. That would be even worse. And he's kind of going against both of them here, and kind of explaining how there's maybe some fallacies in their ways of thinking. So Du Quan questioned Guanzi, saying, "May I ask about the best method for handling the economy?" "What do you mean by the best method?" Guanzi replied. "Great Extravagance instructed me, saying, if carriage curtains and umbrellas are not made in profusion, and large quantities of clothing are not produced, women's work will not flourish. Sacrificial rites involving dishes and platters must entail the use of sacrificial animals. If the greater Lao sacrifice of the feudal lords and the lesser Lao sacrifice of the great officers fail to do this, the 6 domestic animals will not proliferate. If pavilions are not lofty and palaces not elegant, various kinds of woods will not be widely used. What do you think of this statement?" "It is not the right method," said Guanzi. "What do you mean it is not the right method?" "This is a method suitable for places where the amount of territory to be held by each rank is set. The amount controlled by the Son of Heaven is 1,000 li square, while that of the ordinary feudal lord is 100 li square. Along the seacoast, the amount controlled by a viscount is 70 li square, and a baron 50. These all work together like the chest and arms. Therefore, stabilizing the pressure of government demands and coping with surpluses and shortages may be handled completely by the people below and not become the concern of the prince. However, where territory is small, but the prince wishes to compete with larger states, the peasant must plow when it is still cold and weed when it is hot, but the fruits of his labor will go to the government. Women must be diligent in spinning and weaving, but the results of their work will go to public storehouses. This is not done to create resentment among the people or ruin their aspirations, but is due to the fact that unless he possesses accumulated reserves, the prince will have nothing with which to employ men. Furthermore, unless he possesses accumulated wealth, he will have nothing with which to encourage his subordinates. Great extravagances planned cannot be used in a country that is facing danger. Good, said Duke Juan. Duke Juan again questioned Guanzi, saying, Idle Field said to me, those who are skillful can make use of resources that do not belong to them and employ men other than their own. Why not rely on the help of the feudal lords in controlling the empire? Guanzi replied, what Idlefield says is wrong. When it comes to those who are good at running their countries, their land harvesting has been opened for cultivation. Their people settle down, their granaries being full. Their people know propriety and moderation. Moreover, if a country lacks public stores of grain, it will be besieged. If its city walls are weak, they will be penetrated. Indeed, unless one stabilizes the internal situation, it is impossible to retain control of the empire. What Idlefield says is wrong. So, in other words, he's saying if you lose all of the state power and just delegate away the management of food to other feudal lords and whatnot, your ability of a state to carry out any kind of important functions that you're supposed to do, like protecting people, managing walls, managing an army of defense, all of this stuff, you become weaker and weaker to do that too, and you're just open and ripe to be pillaged by somebody else. So in the meantime, yes, some feudal lords, some independent actors might make a lot of money, and they'll be really happy about it. But in time, with change, you're ultimately going to sow the downfall. Moreover, if a I got this. Guanzi then continued saying, if every year 1/10 of the harvest is stored away, in 10 years there will be a full year of reserves. If every year 2/10 of the harvest is stored away, in 5 years there will be a full year of reserves. If half the year's grain is taken over by the state and vegetables are gathered by the people to make up for this, then half of the grain will be in the hands of the government. Therefore, take careful note of the harvest and store up grain accordingly. Over a period of time, accumulate stores so that the state will have 10 years of reserves. Prosperity will then vanquish poverty. Bravery will vanquish cowardice. Wisdom will vanquish stupidity. The subtle will vanquish the crude. Those having a sense of duty will vanquish those who do not. And trained knights will vanquish the untrained hordes who are forced to fight. With all these victories in hand, you will sally forth like the wind and the rain and move like thunder. Since you will be able to go and come freely, no one will be able to resist you. There is no need to wait upon allies. Therefore, what Idlefield says is wrong. Good, said Duke Juan. So there's a lot of readings in here. What I'll do is I'll give a note to Matt after, and I'll write out some other good essays. So if anyone wants to do some additional reading on their own in their free time and ponder these over, I have several more which I think are really good, and I think for anyone who's up to that homework, I think you'll find it very interesting. As you can see, these dialogues are they're not long, and sometimes they're kind of funny. So I think that that's something that everyone could enjoy.
Absolutely.
And
No,
yeah, I don't have any other major notes, but I will give you those that list.
And for those who are currently on the call and would like to download the PDF, I just uploaded it into the chat as well, so people can download their own copy of the text that we were just reading from. So thank you very much for introducing this wonderful, wonderful piece of work. Very much appreciated. And I mean, just those moral principles that provide boundary conditions around like what is an appropriate, reasonable idea or philosophy of taxation versus wealth creation in a more durable fashion, or just how do you basically think about caring for the weak in society in such a manner that it's both useful as well as highly moral at the same time. I wasn't too sure at first when you were saying that it almost seemed when you were reading from that Western thinker, forgot her name, Isabel Weber or something. I thought you were situating a total different world as far as the platonic world of ideals and moral considerations versus the materialist utilitarian considerations of the Guangzhi. But
Exactly.
I can see
And
that
that was my
that's not a
point
real
with the
dichotomy
Lego
at all.
house. That was
Huh?
that was my point with the Lego house. Is what I was saying is it's you can see she struggles in Western language to describe it because what they're doing is they're taking theoretical concepts like what is it to care for the orphans, but they're actually putting material conditions to how one may go about that. And
Yeah.
it's not a strict thing that you have to do it exactly this way. If you're not uh, giving the 90-year-old exactly two coffins, you're failing to care for the elderly. But it's like if it's so abstract for one of these leaders studying this, and this keep in mind, right? Like in China, like the literacy wasn't bad, but the vast majority of people couldn't read.
Hmm.
So this text for 2,000 years was circulated among only like the people who had written the imperial exam, basically. And this would have been one of the primary. So when you hear about the imperial examinations, they would have had to write essays on what Matt just read. They would have to. And did you see the dialogues where it's like, if the river or if you need more horns, what can you do? That would be like an essay question.
Hmm.
It'd be like in the style of Guanzhong, how would you deal with this problem? And they're rating them on their ability to translate the theory into something actionable that can actually be done. And then there's some way to measure the impact on the people. So it's almost like a science.
Very good. Excellent. Uh, we have time for only one or two short questions. So, Kofi got in there early. So, Kofi, it is all yours. You're on mute though, so you have to take
Yeah,
yourself off mute.
thanks very much, Matt. Out here in Pretoria, in South Africa, where it's almost about to be midnight. But I must say, I've enjoyed the nice and brilliant expose of your guest. I think it's Lee John.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. But it got me thinking about many things. But more importantly, the sort of the moral sentiments of Adam Smith, but also behavioral economics, the ancestors of it. And I think it was really, really nice with more emphasis on virtues. So I put in the chat there that it got me to think about writing something on economic virtues of modern China. I don't know if I could write that, but that's the idea I have. But my question very quickly is this Guanzi being taught at in the schools, universities, and at what level is it being taught today, if at all? Thank you, Matt.
Great question.
Yeah, no, it's definitely being taught. I didn't go through the Chinese school system, so I couldn't tell you what grade. But a lot of these stories in shorter forms are introduced very young. So, like even in grades like 4 or 5, sometimes there's short stories based on these texts. It's similar. Lots of poems are done that way as well. So it's like when kids are learning to read and to speak, like in grades 1 and 2, they're actually reading like Tang Dynasty poems. But definitely, as you get older, and then I know in the there's a the Central Party School So anyone in government as well, there's a curriculum that they're following as well. But definitely high school students would be exposed to these essays in their civics and government classes.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, and please send me any of those essays, and I'll make those available for sure. That's high value stuff. Maybe even they might even find a little spot in the Library of Alexandria that we host. Jerry has a little comment.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Thanks, I guess, Mr. Lee. That was
Mhm.
a brilliant presentation because I had never heard of Guanzi before and or read it, and it was fascinating to see the thinking involved, thousands of years ago, which we could really use today. But I just wanted to make a quick comment on the very first part of your presentation with the orchestra playing. And, you were asking us, to think of how the musicians thought of the conductor. And, when he tells one musician to play a little softer, how he responds to the conductor. And it reminded me of a time, this is many, many years ago, when I was able to attend a concert given by a famous German choir, the St. Thomas Boys Choir. And because I was working with security, I got to be in there in the morning when they were rehearsing, and there was no one in the cathedral, it was a 4-part boys choir and the conductor. And doing the rehearsal, the conductor didn't do it. He got the assistant conductor to do it. And the conductor went walking around the inside of the cathedral. He'd walk around and stop, and he'd listen to them singing for a while, and he'd walk to another part, and he'd listen to them singing, and then he'd go to another part. Then when he was finished, after about 10, 15 minutes, he went back up on the stage, and he took each of the parts, and he adjusted the way they were singing. He changed the volume for each of the 4 parts. And it just reminded me of, your presentation, that the conductor, like, if each musician is just looking at the music in front of them and playing exactly what it says, it doesn't actually give you a beautiful sound necessarily. But if you have a conductor who actually, in his mind, knows what the whole piece should sound like to be beautiful, then he can adjust the different parts to get that beautiful sound for the audience. And that's what I thought of when you showed that initial music presentation. So I just wanted to add that comment to you, and thank you again for your presentation.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I was thinking too. It's like when he was walking around, right? It might have seemed at first like he was disinterested or something, but really he's actually like he's gauging the volume in different parts and he's gathering all this data. And then when he comes back to them, it's like he's just modulating each of these different like groups so that they're actually going to be better together. And they're trying really hard, but he's almost doing them a service if they can see it that way, which I'm sure they probably would.
Hmm. Yeah.
And also, like, I think the obvious analogy then is, so when I'm reading and I'm talking about the prince, right? The prince is the conductor. So the conductor of the economy, and his job is not to steal the grain from the rich people and just give it away. Like that would be like, oh, let's just cancel the horns. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's just half of you go away. No, it's like, what is the most subtle and gentle way that you can just kind of tap it back onto course in the correct direction which you know everybody deep down wants it to be going. They want it to be as good as possible, right? And most people get that. So most people were quite happy in China whenever they had a crackdown on the predatory lending, like fintech apps that were popping up. People were really happy about that, and they were so angry online, like righteous indignation that this was going on. And then when the government just taps it back on course, there's just some natural thing to us where we realize, yes, like this is a good fix. Like we want fintech apps, but we don't want them holding billions and billions of dollars in teenagers' debt who want to take a girl on a date, and these apps are enticing them to borrow money at high interest rates, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also on top of that, and I mean that's a great point as far as introducing a certain moral constraint upon the rapaciousness of those who would want to be predators or parasites off of the vulnerable. In a practical way, that's currently happening right now. Like I don't know of too many examples of this world where the nation state is at conducting proper battle with these private financier parasites, except for what you just pointed out. That's a very big current case study of that. But back to the issue of what Jerry was bringing up regarding leadership and this philosophy of healthy leadership versus the unhealthy kind, the more tyrannical kind or manipulative, is that I was thinking that in looking at the conductor and his relationship with the performers in that clip that you selected, there's this reciprocity, like there's this mutual admiration where he obviously also admires those who have been working under him, and they admire him. So there was this back and forth, and I was thinking that there's one of the most important principles in terms of Western civilization has been the idea of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, so that seeing yourself as part of the thing that you're leading makes a good leader. A bad leader is somebody who sees themselves as somehow like godlike above the thing that they're leading, kind of like a manipulator of a Dungeons and Dragons game, as if they're not a part of the thing itself. So with good composers or conductors, which involves also working before the performance itself, right? There's all of the weeks and months of working and building relationships with the musicians, as well as the actual official performance. There's this subjective sense that they are themselves a part of the thing. So I definitely, that was also communicated both in the stories from ancient China that you selected, of the leader that sees themselves, they're doing for others what they would want have done to them, and also for the conductor, who definitely is a key part, is a performer himself. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and the stuff from earlier to the middle portion, right? It's like there is a very interesting aspect to how in all different animals, especially the males, who tend to often take a more leadership role in mammal kingdom, not always, but often. Um, Testosterone is always designed to increase in those who are in a higher position, uh, but it's designed to read whether or not you're in a high position based on how others treat you. So it's like that conductor or the people in the marching band study that was mentioned, right? He would feel like a sense like that. Like he would have a greater sense of reciprocity. And that's where it really makes a lot of sense if you can imagine that there's somebody out there just that will make up a character, right? Who is not, he didn't practice with the band. He's not actually really qualified, and he's not that good at music, but he had a lot of money and he paid to conduct the orchestra, right? It's like if he's doing that and he's not actually got that relationship with the people, he might try to make it sound good, but maybe he wouldn't quite care about the individual people's feelings. Maybe he would be slightly more likely to just quiet down one person, lift up another person, very mainly focused on how he thinks the music's making him sound, and not so much on like, oh, like how am I going to help everybody kind of come together. And obviously in music, it's very easy to see why a good song would benefit both characters, but I'm sure you can easily see then, okay, let's take that character, put him in a leadership role, right? Let's put him in the White House, right? Somebody who he's never really been like looked up to or actually liked by people. And you select for these characters who have these antisocial personalities, like they have either like some kind of uh, like for example, they've always been short their whole life, so it's really given them like a like some people are short and they're fine with it, but some people they develop this kind of anger and resentment, and it's like let's put him in charge of a huge army, and I think it'll be easier to get him to do what we want him to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, History Man has a quick question saying, do you guys think that the West will ever adopt this principle? I'll just say one thing. I'm sure I don't know if you have a thought on that, Leah. That's why we're doing these things. History Man is because if people don't even know that it exists, this way of organizing society, the answer is no way. That it works, that it even exists, that it's being done today, that it has made us possible in the first place. It's been these lessons, this knowledge has been extracted by design from our history books and official narratives. So if people don't know that this is reality, they can't fight for reality. So yeah, that's why I would approach that answer. Very,
Yeah,
very, very big. Hopefully,
I would
maybe.
agree too. That's how I feel too. I feel like for me, um, obviously, it comes more naturally to China because it's a part of their history. But I just keep coming back to the fact that we are all humans, right? We are all people, and I think that the role I can play, which I've thought about a lot, is like if I can serve as if I can communicate, right? Because I do feel that I'm one of those people who is on that pro social leadership type of mindset. And I'm not saying I'm trying to run for some office. I'm just saying it's just a part of how I think. And there's going to be a lot of people in the West where they really promote more the dominance side. And if you start watching media and you think, what kind of leader are they promoting? Try to find somebody who meets the category that I was describing about the pro-social leader. They almost don't exist. Like look at House of Cards. Like they're trying to make everybody think that it's all the antisocial dominance strategy that chimps use, as opposed to the more human pro-social affiliative strategy where you're actually attracting people towards yourself. So my mindset is I think it's possible for sure, but I think it will rely on people who can communicate that this different side exists, right? And that's why going about it in multiple ways, going from a science perspective, there's science that shows this, right? Science unshackled, you can see truth through that. So I think that I think it's totally possible. It just depends on our ability to communicate with other people and let them know that there's another way. And here's the good news: the worse it gets in the West, the more open people will be to that. So in some ways, it's kind of like it will work out for them either way. Either things will improve on their own, or if these antisocial actors cause people's lives to get much worse, they're they're in for a surprise. Communication has never been easier, right? And I think that just the ability to reach 1,000, 5,000, a million people with a simple video like this, it's totally possible.
I noticed that there are some people who have been waiting to ask a question, but unfortunately, we have run out of time for now. However, I will make sure send me an email with your question. I will share it with the speaker and also maybe and make sure that I can broker those conversations. So questions will be answered no matter what. But unfortunately, we have to wrap it up for today. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Lee, for doing this and introducing this wonderful text. And next week, we're going to meet up with, once again, and we'll have Dr. Quan Le pick up the torch and look at the battle for an aristocratic education, both in the context of Eastern combats between oligarchical versus more humanist moral systems, as well as with a look to the Platonic battles throughout Western civilization, paralleling the exact same fight. So that'll be a fun presentation, same time next Sunday. Once again, thank you all, and thank you, Lee.